Hey, deserving listeners, this is the third installment in which I read your mental health hot takes and comment on them. The first installment was the collaboration with Isaiah from the Therapy Today YouTube channel. This was his idea to poll the audience, each of our audiences, for mental health hot takes, and I received hundreds of mental health hot takes from y'all. And in the first episode with Isaiah, I think we only got to about 5 of them. So I thought I would do some more episodes reacting to your hot takes. And in the second installment, in my solo episode, only got to about 20. So I need to seriously go faster. So let's do it this time. Carson. Oh, and by the way, I have a cold. I don't have COVID or the flu because I test, or at least indications of the test are saying I don't have COVID or the flu. You can never know for sure, but I am stuffy, and if that annoys you, maybe don't listen to this episode. But the show must go on whether I am sick or not. So Carson from upstate New York, he says, there should be friends therapy, like couple therapy, but for 2 friends. End of hot take. Absolutely, I agree with this, Carson from upstate New York. When I was first planning on becoming a therapist, I wanted to be a therapist for bands, for music artists, because I, as a musician in bands and as a fan of bands like the Beatles or other bands that have broken up, I thought that it was a very important service that should be at least available for bands to have therapists who specialize in this kind of work. Because, if you're going to have therapy for individuals, yeah, it makes sense. If you're going to have therapy for families, makes sense. If you have therapy for couples, makes sense. But why do we stop there? Why don't we have therapy for bands, for friends, for coworkers? These relationships are just as important or impactful or problematic, conflictual as any sort of marriage is, Like I remember saying this because I realized it in my youth that being in a band is like being married, except generally speaking, you don't have sex with each other. So, not all the time, but generally speaking, unless you're Fleetwood Mac, but meaning that I observed when I was like 20 that you are really involved in each other's lives and you really depend on each other. When you're in a real band, like you're really gigging all the time and writing together all the time and depending on each other all the time, especially in the early days when we didn't have any money and we would have to share everything, sleep in the same room, that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, and friends, absolutely. Now, there are therapists that will work with friends. Another configuration that often isn't focused on is adults and their parents. Of course, that is something that should be done. It's done occasionally. I specialize in that kind of work. Some people will hire me to do that sort of thing, but it's rarely thought of. But so important, It's just kind of weird that we have certain relationships where they're like, yeah, of course, you go to therapy, and then others is just like you would never hear someone say, "Oh, you're in an ongoing conflict with your boss at work. Well, you should go to therapy." Like no one would ever say that, and why? Anyway, Anonymous, he says therapists are incentivized to encourage their patients to act immorally when it benefits them. End of hot take. Therapists are incentivized to encourage their patients to act immorally when it benefits them. Well, I could speculate about what that means. That's certainly a hot take, but I'm just trying to imagine where Anonymous is coming from. Like, if I had a client that I was encouraging, I guess, to maybe cheat on their partner or to exploit their employees so they have more money so they can pay me. I don't know. I don't know what they're referring to there. Ruby, she says, self-help and self-improvement is a loophole that leads to never-ending dissatisfaction. Self-help and I think I don't think they mean loophole. I think they mean like a loop or a circular causality. Self-help and self-improvement is a loop that leads to never-ending dissatisfaction. Well, that's certainly a hot take and ridiculous, Ruby. And if I'm going to get through these, I'm just going to have to react. Now, I did not tell people when I sent out this survey. I think I sent it on YouTube and Patreon. I didn't say, by the way, I'm going to like ridicule you or anything. But if you're going to put a hot take out there, I'm gonna have my hot take on your hot take, whether you like it or not. Non-consensual, reciprocal hot take. Patron and YouTube member Sonia, she says, I'm experiencing a lack of resilience in people born after 1990 in the workplace. So just chiming in, I'm pretty sure I did not address this one in the first episode in which we did hot takes. So if I did, then I apologize. But anyway, I'm experiencing a lack of resilience in people born after 1990 in the workplace. It seems as if they cannot differentiate between work and personal life. Many issues raised by them seem to be about how bad they feel or how bad someone makes them feel, resulting in a lack of ability to work through issues. End of hot take. Yeah, this is a common statement that you'll hear throughout time, that the young people today are so whiny and they lack resilience and they don't respect people. I remember thinking this when I was like in the fourth grade. I remember thinking, my goodness, the first graders today don't respect the fourth graders like the way we used to respect fourth graders when we were in the first grade. I mean, I'm not even joking. I can't remember exactly what grade it was, but it was, I was young. So I think it's just a bias that we have, that we will look at younger people. And of course, the annoying ones of a group are going to be most noticed by us, right? So if I'm a boss and I have 20 employees from a generation before me, I'm Gen X, so if I have 20 millennials or something, then the one or two millennials that are annoying are going to be very noticeable to me, and I'm going to spend a lot of time dealing with them. And if you were when I was first coming into the workforce and I had baby boomers that were the bosses, right? Well, I'm looking around at my fellow peers and myself, and I'm thinking, yeah, we're pretty respectful. I'm respectful. I'm trying to do my best at work, but I don't necessarily know or am aware or will emphasize that, among the 20 of us Gen X people, that there's a couple people that are annoying, because I don't have to deal with those two people very directly. So I think it's just a natural bias that we have, that we'll get annoyed with a few and we'll generalize it to the many. And it's just ageism. It's just a natural thing that we do. And then you get into echo chambers online or around the water cooler, and this is something you'll hear of any generation. And you'll hear young people say shit about old people. It's just ageism. I hope that you, listener, don't fall into these ways of thinking. We have data on this sort of thing, and the data does not support any of these generalizations. Now, some people say, well, younger people today, like Gen Alpha or something, they went through the pandemic at a formative time in their life. Yeah, but we don't know what the effects are, Like one of the observations, and seemingly in some of the data that I've seen, is that younger people today are more into self-care. They're more into noticing their needs and not necessarily acting or dressing in a way that they feel like people in authority want them to dress or act like. And so on one hand, you would, the way I'm framing it, you'd say, oh, they're healthier. But from another angle, you'd say, oh, they're more narcissistic, or they're lazy, or they're broken, or they don't understand how to, they don't understand how to behave in public, like the Gen Z stare or whatever, these kinds of generalizations. And it's hard to make any kind of conclusion It's hard to measure these sorts of things. I'll never forget, I was at a conference for therapists, for professionals, and the keynote speaker, literally their whole point was generalizing about the generations. They were like, okay, y'all, and this is a clinician, and she's like, okay, Gen X, we're like this, and millennials, they're like this. And that was her whole thing. And I can't remember if she was talking about like other therapists, like millennial therapists, or she's talking about clients or both or something. And I remember sitting in the audience, and this is before I knew about these sorts of things. So it raised red flags for me, kind of. Like my spidey sense was like, something's wrong with this presentation. But I didn't really know what was wrong precisely, so I just went along with it kind of, and then later would look up the research and say, like, that woman was ridiculous. So even in our professional world, you'll have people that will be ageist and will draw generalizations. So, this notion that people born after 1990, which, who would that be? Would that be Gen Alpha or Gen Z or something? That they generally lack resilience is just not true, or is speculative at best. There's some evidence that younger people today are more respectful and more functional, because of all the work we've done to raise awareness about emotions and needs and boundaries, that they have the right to push back. Now, can there be abuses of that, right? Yeah, absolutely. Can you have an individual who takes that too far? Like, I don't want to work tomorrow because that's oppressing my ability to self-regulate, or I don't know what the fuck they would say. But yeah, but in every generation, there's idiots. That's the conclusion that everyone should make. Every generation has idiots. And if you are experiencing an idiot from Gen Z, then you're just experiencing an idiot from Gen Z. It's not that all Gen Zs are idiots. Anyway, Ben Z, she says, when people are being playful or crying and that it's their inner child, something about it makes me feel like they are labeling those as inappropriate for an adult person. Oh, interesting. So their hot take is, if someone is being playful or they're crying or some other kind of what we would say normal adult behavior, and they're like, oh, it's my inner child, then it's kind of sending a message that adults aren't supposed to do that, which, yeah, I would agree with. I hadn't really thought about that. It makes sense to me. I've been talking a lot about it in the Season 9 Love is Blind reaction videos, that people will point at Edmund and say that he's immature or childish or broken or autistic or something. When if you just look at his behavior, there's a wide set of behaviors, but some of the behaviors is him just being jubilant and happy and laughing and excited, and everyone's like, oh, he's immature and he can't regulate his emotions, and it's like, well, maybe, but actually him expressing his jubilance and happiness and joy could actually be healthy and adult, and the opposite, that it's actually mature to have spontaneous positive emotions. Anonymous, she says, many therapeutic approaches are made up and might only help due to placebo and the therapeutic relationship. End of hot take. Yeah, it depends on which ones we're looking at, but and it's going too far to say this like generally or totally or completely or something, but it's a well understood thing to think about in our field, that a lot of our approaches have placebo effects and are really helping people because of the therapeutic relationship and not because of the particular theories and models and techniques within that theory. It's well understood, and so yeah, that's why I think any good therapist needs to understand that the theory or the approach that they are adhering to or adopting or using, that the common factors across a lot of different positive outcomes is the relationship. And I could talk for a long time about this actually, but but I won't because I need to get through these. Angry Mama says, postpartum depression is just society pathologizing women. Postpartum depression is just society pathologizing women. Mostly disagree with you, Angry Mama. That now, might some people be labeled as suffering from postpartum depression when they aren't? And it is a way of pathologizing women who are just struggling or are just experiencing normal, early parenting experiences. Yeah, but postpartum depression as a actual thing that happens to people is an actual thing that happens to people and has nothing to do with sexism. It is a well understood, well known phenomenon. And I want to add that postpartum anxiety is perhaps even more prevalent than postpartum depression. So when we're talking about postpartum, and what seems to happen is that for some people, maybe because they had a predisposition, not necessarily to depression, but for some people, they seem to have a predisposition for postpartum anxiety or depression, meaning that they've never had anxiety or depression, or they've never had diagnosable thresholds, of it. And then they have a child, and it can also happen before birth as well, but that they have not just like, oh, I'm a little down or, oh, I'm a little anxious, but they'll have like full blown across the board, intense, quintessential, what lay people would call clinical depression, or, a brand new generalized anxiety disorder that's highly, functionally harmful and distorted and, limiting and all that kind of stuff. So what seems to happen is that there are some people, because there's, a lot of changes in hormones and stuff. Now, there's also, for a lot of young parents, there can be a lot of pressures on them and harm to them and isolation of them, right? That can also contribute to those things. But generally speaking, if I am hearing about a case in which it's legit postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression, what I usually will find is that although there might be factors in their personal life that are contributing, it seems, we can never know, but a lot of the times what I will conclude is that it had to do with the biological changes, seemingly, that are, present after birth and that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm meandering. It's sort of like, it's a similar thing that I would hear, not so much anymore, but in the past, where they would say ADHD is just pathologizing normal kid behavior. And does that happen? Yeah, but what that tells me is that you've never actually seen someone with actual ADHD. Because if you've actually seen someone, or you have it yourself, then you would never say that it's just pathologizing normal child behavior. Anyway, let's take a break. All right, back from the break. Marta, she says, people hide trauma and social anxiety behind the label of introversion, which results in normalizing isolation. End of hot take. Yeah, I mean, I don't watch TikTok, so I imagine that a lot of this happens on TikTok or on Twitter or something. People hide trauma and social anxiety behind the label of introversion. Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about what introversion is. And we have this weird thing in our society where it's hard for me to know exactly why, but it seems pretty clear when you actually watch the sort of things that people will gravitate towards, that there are certain labels in psychology that people are much more comfortable labeling themselves with. Like there are, if someone were to be socially awkward, there's a lot of possible constructs that would likely be applied to someone like that. If someone came to me and they were socially awkward, there's like a dozen possible constructs, like, autism spectrum being one, ADHD being another one, but there are several others, schizoid, avoidant personality. There's a lot avoidant personality disorder, not avoidant avoidant attachment style, and to some extent, autism is one of the lesser likely explanations that I will land on, that experts will land on. Yet, if you go on TikTok or online and you were to ask a question like, "Hey, I'm socially awkward," and you told your experience of it, then 95% of the time people would say, "Oh, you're autistic," or something like that. I could be making all this up, but it's similar with introversion, that people, for whatever reason, are much easier to label themselves as an introvert than they are to say that they have social anxiety or trauma. Now, there's also a different gravitation towards trauma versus, for whatever reason, people almost never label themselves as anxious, even though it is the most prevalent disorder. If you didn't know this, then that might be kind of shocking to you. But anxiety is by far the most common, in terms of actually people meeting the criteria for a mental health disorder. It is, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but it is way more prevalent, like maybe 10 times more prevalent than autism spectrum, maybe more than that. I'd have to look it up, but you would never know that because people never talk about it. And now, I'm not saying that anyone who labels themselves as an introvert online, they're wrong. I don't know. I haven't really taken notice of that because, again, I don't look at TikTok. But yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Capuchin says, the democratization or diffusion of mental health concepts or expressions can make it more complicated to have honest discussions and exchange of views. Progress or being a good person to others. I don't really understand that one, but that's okay. Anonymous patron says, psychopaths can be good people. Anonymous patron says, psychopaths can be good people. Yeah. Depends on what we mean by psychopaths. But if we're going off of the way that we in our field talk about it, someone that suffers from psychopathy, meaning that they have a lack of empathy. Now, if we're talking about like full-blown psychopaths, people that are con artists and this sort of, and again, it depends on what you mean by good people, right? Like when we look at someone like Bill Cosby, who it was found, convicted, right, of sexually, assaulting, raping, dozens of women that they know of, and drugging them, blah, blah, blah. And yet, if you know anything about his philanthropy and his work to elevate black people in the entertainment industry, unless you're really biased, then you have to acknowledge that he did a lot of really good things, like really, really good things, when he didn't have to do those things, or he didn't have to do them that much. And so could you say that he's a psychopath or suffers from some form or theme of psychopathy if the allegations are true? Yes. Can he be labeled outside of those actions as a good person? I suppose so. That's an extreme example, but now if we're just talking about people who lack empathy, generally speaking, and we're not talking about a psychopath, then can someone have psychopathy, lack empathy, be antisocial personality on that spectrum, and also be a good person? Yeah. I've worked with people like that. Just being a just having lack of empathy doesn't mean that you have a compulsion to harm others. It means you often will harm others because you just don't care about other people's feelings. But if you intellectually understand that you shouldn't harm other people, then you will try to take notice of how you might harm others because you intellectually understand that that's not morally okay, or that you don't want to push people away from you, or you don't want to incur the consequences of harming others because, anyway. Carolyn, she says, too many people have ADHD. Too many people have ADHD. Yeah, I don't know what the hot take is. Like, people shouldn't have that. I think what Carolyn is saying is too many people are self-diagnosing in a false way going on. patron Marie says, a lot of things attributed to poor mental health are instead direct consequence of living conditions under capitalism, stress, exhaustion, depression, and anxiety. Yeah, I already talked about this one, I think, in the previous episode. And yeah, absolutely a systems approach to individual mental health and also to groups of people and their mental health and their well-being, to ignore the societal stressors is to sometimes ignore a major factor, if not the factor. If you take an individual and they're being raised in a family that both parents are working all the time, they're very stressed out, they get home, there's no time for parenting or very little time for parenting. There's very little time for the marriage or for their own mental health as parents or for their own physical health. And so their lives start to go down the tubes. Their parenting is poor to the child because of those stresses. And the reason why the parents are overstressed is because of the owners of production are exploiting labor, and the government doesn't do enough to help labor or to help income disparity or to provide cheap access to medical insurance or medical help, that kind of thing. And then you have that kid who grows up and has their own issues and imparts those issues on people around them and on their own children. And all of that would never have happened. Like, none of those bad things would have happened if we just lived in a different version of capitalism or a different version of society that didn't exploit labor in that way. Absolutely. And then, you add in racism and ableism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and all that, then, you get a bunch of people walking around with a lot of harm and lack of access and being, anyway. Patron Sarah, she says, social media platforms should encourage licensed therapists to share their expertise using verified expert badges and flag everyone else's mental health content as potential misinformation. End of hot take. Yeah, it'd be nice, but there are a lot of therapists online, increasingly so, honestly, who are also completely talking out of their ass. But yeah, that'd be nice. I don't think it would do anything, right? That's one of the disheartening thing about the internet, is that when the internet was really coming into its own in the aughts, it just seemed like, oh my God, like, this is going to solve so many problems. No one is going to be subjected to misinformation because there's Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia isn't 100%, but it's a lot better than other sources, especially before the internet, when you just had people just randomly talking to each other. So, and at first it was kind of that way. It's hard to really remember that time, but I do remember that time, that even with social media, even with Facebook and Twitter and that sort of thing, it was just like, oh my God, this is bringing people together. And the fact that I even have this podcast is a result of that movement of, because before I would have to appeal to a radio station or to a TV station or something, and I don't have to do that anymore. I can reach the masses. It's a democratization of content providing, which I'm a product of. But I don't think anyone predicted, I certainly didn't predict that all that would do would just open the floodgates for misinformation and cultivation of people and harm, and also the continued exploitation of the masses by corporations, by people with money and power politically and everything. And so, yeah, should Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or something have a verified expert badge? Yeah, but imagine if Elon Musk on Twitter had that ability. Who would he allow to have a verified expert badge? Plus, even if it was all done well, the masses would just disregard that. It's fucking disheartening. When I'll be on YouTube and I'll be watching some video about the Apollo 11 landing or something, And because so many people believe that the moon landing was a hoax, the first thing you see underneath the video is a link to Wikipedia. And because essentially YouTube is trying to push back on the misinformation that people will watch this video. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but I'm under the impression that any YouTube video that has to do with the moon landing, whether it is accurate or misinformation, automatically has this, bot included link underneath it that says like, the moon landing is not a hoax. And if you want to look up for more information, or any video that has to do with vaccines, or any video that has to do with COVID, or any video that has to do with, I don't know, maybe QAnon or something, or even Hitler. I don't know. But there's, they have to include this because there's such a sizable number of people that believe in the nonsense. Like, I grew up with with the ability to talk with people about the moon landing and just being able to freely talk about it. Now, I feel like whenever I talk about it, or whenever I'm talking about it online or in person with other people, I have to either wonder to myself if the person I'm talking to believes that it was a hoax, or I have to have a caveat. I'll have to say, oh my God, I have this Lego set for the Apollo 11 landing. And by the way, just so you know, like any information out there that says that it was a hoax is ridiculous. I did not predict that. I thought that the internet would do away with all that shit because, with information, people should not believe in bullshit. Anyway, let's take another break. All right, back from the break. YouTube member L says, comfort is not the goal. People need to learn to deal with discomfort. Okay, not really sure what that means exactly. Maybe I could agree with that. On its face, though, I'm guessing it has some problematic assumptions within it, but, I would have to hear more. YouTube nurse Heather, she says, dissociation should be prevented. Dissociation should be prevented. Yeah. Who would think otherwise? Like, people, are there people online saying dissociation should be encouraged or that it's a good thing? Because people who suffer from actual dissociation universally don't like it. Now, you can learn how to live with it because you can't get rid of it, at least in the short term. Yeah. But dissociation fucking sucks. It'd be like saying depression is a good thing or something. I mean, it's not. Now, might there be some silver linings or some strengths that emerge from that experience? Sure. In the same way that grief and loss can have that, or trauma. But yeah, dissociation. Well, I don't know what you mean by should be prevented. If I look at it from my perspective, I have clients who dissociate, and we do a lot to, generally speaking, to try to prevent them from dissociating, meaning that we try to identify triggers and try to help them in session and out of session steer away from those triggers, or learn the initial indicators that dissociation might be coming so that they can take care of themselves or move away, or just have measures in place so that they can freely dissociate without any major consequences. Like, they come home from work and they tell their spouse, I think I'm on the verge of dissociating, or I might be dissociating right now, and I need you to take care of the kids, or I need help or something. There can be things like that. But anyway, like a management system. But prevention, yeah, absolutely. We all, any therapist that knows what they're doing will do everything they can to try to prevent dissociation from occurring. Sometimes it can't be avoided. Anyway, patron Alexandria, she says, but getting back to Nurse Heather, are you saying that people online are encouraging dissociation? Because I feel like I've seen a lot of weird movements, but not that one. Patron Alexandria, she says, I think that the, quote, I don't owe anyone anything, unquote, is making society cold. Okay, so you're saying that a lot of people are saying, I don't I don't owe anyone anything. I don't need to give. I don't know what is that about. Yeah, I suppose. Well, I mean, it depends. You don't owe anyone anything, but you don't want to be a dick. But Jane says, done with Sergio. I feel like I just learned the difference between caring about myself or caring for myself and worrying. I learned the difference between caring about myself and worrying. If the self-care activity is causing stress, try something else. If you're worrying instead of doing, go do something else for that self-care need. Yeah, I think I understand what that is, Jane, and I think that is wise. Hassan, just trying to be controversial, haha. Okay, so this is them saying, haha, I'm just trying to be controversial with my hot take. Because it's possible to diagnose every single person on the planet at some point in their life with something in the DSM, because it's possible to diagnose every single person on the planet, that's not true. Statistics, it's hard to measure this sort of thing, but it seems like across cultures that at some point in an individual's life that 50% of people will qualify for one thing at least in the DSM. There needs to be a better way to differentiate pathology from normal human experience. We have that ability. I don't know if TikTok does. On a parallel line, even though therapy can be helpful for everyone. Now backtracking, could we say that everyone is on the spectrum of something? Yeah. If we lower the standard, if we lower the threshold from qualifying for a full-blown DSM diagnosis, if we lower that threshold to, in that direction, then yeah, everyone has, especially when we include things that aren't in the DSM, like, attachment, insecurity, or something like that. And then you say we need a better way to differentiate between pathology and normal human experience. Well, we do. It's a bit more subjective than often is talked about, but we do. It has to do with it functionally is harming a portion of your life, like your relationships or work or that sort of thing. Anyway, on a parallel line, even though therapy can be helpful for everyone, it's surely less needed in some cultures that might look authoritarian because they're less on individualism scale compared to the West. Reason can be that core families or even relative friends. There's a lot to talk about there. But yeah. So it sounds like Hassan is saying, I don't like the fact that the West is telling my people and me that we need to do more therapy because not every culture needs therapy because we have other mechanisms in our culture that help people. Yeah, that's true. Sarah says, self-diagnosis should not be taken seriously. Professional need degrees for a reason. Yeah, are people taking self-diagnoses seriously? But anyway, they say, Jungian typology helps understand people's minds so well. Yeah, I don't know if that's a hot take. Certainly, if you find that Jungian typology is good for you, then it's good for you. Full corn friend of the pod, KJ Gaia. So full corn meaning that they've been a YouTube member for at least a year. She says, emergency responders may be a group that struggles the most with their own relationships, despite being among the best at physically and emotionally caring for victims. They have some of the biggest hearts, and most are walking around completely broken and fully there to support others. Ask me how I know. I see. End of hot take. Yeah. There's a lot that we could talk about, and I've talked about it before for emergency responders or first responders or people in the medical field or even law enforcement or this sort of thing, that there's a lot of, we've understood for a long time that there's a lot of trauma, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, burnout, and it's real. It's not just like, oh, I'm a little stressed out. Like you can literally suffer from PTSD, full-blown PTSD, like life-debilitating PTSD because of not only just individual events, but like the relentless nature of being traumatized throughout the day, 40 hours a week, that kind of thing. And that they entered that profession because they're good, caring people, but they're soaking up so much trauma, and without proper support or good labor laws to give them the opportunity to decompress or take a break or slow down or something, you have them suffering quite a bit. Yeah, absolutely. I did an episode on this like in the very beginning of the podcast, like 16 years ago. Anonymous UK, she says, people who often place others' well-being above theirs are less likely to have the concern back for their well-being. People who place others' well-being are less likely to have concern for their own well-being. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Full corn long-term friend. So again, KJ Gaia, she says, I can't decide if encouraging women to be as successful as they can be is ultimately costing them a future life worth living. I make over 6 figures and am fairly pretty and love my job, and I don't think I intimidate men. I think I emasculate them. Okay, I can't decide if encouraging women to be successful is ultimately the best course of action. Men like women who need them. Yeah, well, but I would say the good men out there are not intimidated by women who make a good living. So, but I don't know, maybe a good one or a good enough one is out there who is intimidated. And so what, you have to take a worse job so you don't intimidate, or don't tell him what you do or how much you make. I don't know. I get that. And what a stupid fucking world where a woman would have to be concerned with that. Patron Senia, she says, too much therapy can be damaging for some types of clients, as it makes them overanalyze and constantly look for more things to fix themselves. Yeah, this is in line with some other hot takes. Yeah, sure. Are some clients in that category? Yeah, but typically when I hear this sentiment, I just think that people just don't like therapy, or they have someone in their life that is going to a lot of therapy and doesn't seem to be changing, which does happen, and there's various reasons for that. But anyway, proud patron Missy, she says, I'm not sure if this is a hot take, but my favorite quote from my former therapist is, you can beat yourself up all you want, but it won't get you any closer to healing. End of comment. You can beat yourself up all you want, but it won't get you any closer to healing. Yeah. I like that hot take. I feel like most people would. Tracy, she says, people who never hug anyone, rarely, if ever, it's a personality difference. It's pretty much has to be trauma related, right? Okay. So what Tracy is saying is, people who never hug anyone, that's just not like a difference in personality. That's because of trauma, right? Well, there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't, if you take 10 people who have a policy, let's say it's pretty extreme, where they're just like, I don't hug anyone. I don't like to hug anyone. Is there going to be some of them that have trauma around physical boundaries and harm and abuse? Yeah, undoubtedly. Are there going to be some people who have trauma about abandonment? Yeah, undoubtedly. Are you going to have some people who just don't like it? Sure. They don't have any trauma history or any kind of thing like that? Yeah. Are you going to have people that are, that have what we would call highly sensitive? Sometimes this is associated or overlapping with autism spectrum or something. Yeah. There are people who seemingly, there seems to be some spectrum of how sensitive one's nervous system is to life, to the outside world, to touch, to information, to lights, to your own emotions, to food, to textures. And I'm actually on the spectrum that I've learned, and I've given it a lot of thought. And again, this is one of the first episodes that I did like years and years ago. I had a colleague of mine come on the podcast, and she talked about highly sensitive people. And as she was going over all the research and the different philosophies about it, during the episode, it's like, oh my God, like I'm kind of like that. I'm not extreme, but I have a lot of those signs, like I cannot wear anything that is scratchy, or like I can't wear a watch. I've always wanted to be one of those guys that wears like a watch. I have tried so hard to wear. I can't even wear a watch that's really comfortable, like a one of those watches that's made to be very comfortable, like a small profile watch with a leather strap that's really low, just I can't. I can barely wear my wedding ring. I've gotten used to it, but that's it. Like I can't wear necklaces, or I can't even wear shoes. Like pretty much 99% of the time I am not wearing shoes. I can't stand shoes. Now part of it is just my lifestyle because I work at home, but even when I was working at the university, when I was in my office, I would instantly take off my shoes. It would bother some of my students, actually. They would tell, once they got to know me, they'd be like, yeah, it kind of bothered me when I first met you, and I'm in your office and you took off your shoes and you like reclined and put your socked feet on the desk, and I was like, who is this guy? And yeah, is there something kind of wrong with me? Like, am I just too casual or disrespectful? I suppose maybe. But anyway, so can you also have people who are along those lines who don't like to hug people? Yeah, but at the same time, I love to hug people and I'm very sensitive. So when I hug people, I really feel it. So I think there's a lot of different things going on here, But Tracy, if you have people in your life that as a policy never hug anyone, like let's say you had a best friend or a spouse or a child that is just like, I don't hug people because that's just a part of my neurodivergence or something, and it hurts your feelings, then yeah, it sucks. But you can't say from the outside to that person, you're wrong about that. Or say, you need to go to therapy, so you got to change that. Now, is there a conversation there? I suppose. Anyway, Mikey, he says, there is no such thing as faking mental illness for attention. There's no such thing as faking a mental illness for attention. Even if behavior seems attention-seeking, that itself indicates underlying issues. Cutting is an example I hear being dismissed a lot, especially if the cuts are skin deep. End of comment. Yeah, I'm glad you gave an example, Mikey, because if you just had the beginning, I'd be like, huh? There's no such thing as faking a mental illness for attention. And there is. There is such thing as we know that people do fake mental illness. We've known about that for decades, especially like in the forensic criminal world, right? There's a famous case in which this mob boss effectively tricked many mental health professionals and the legal system, because he was. I don't know the full story, but he was, I think, found guilty of being a mob boss, RICO, whatever, racketeering, all that kind of stuff. But he got out of being made to go to prison because he presented as having schizophrenia, I think, and was extremely not functional. Like he needed constant nursing care or something like that. And then he did this for decades. And of course, everyone would be suspicious that he's faking. So there was a lot of effort to detect that, but he was so good at it that he got away with it for a really long time. So people, they fake, and that's just a famous case. It happens. But this other example, I totally agree with that. It's just like, oh, that 13-year-old girl, okay, she's cutting, and it's just, she's not cutting very deep. She's just faking it for attention. And I think what your point is, okay, well, let's say that she doesn't have the compulsion to cut the way that other people might, but she's still doing it for some reason that we should pay attention to. We shouldn't just dismiss it, which I would completely agree with. Scandinavian patron, she says, therapists practicing solely CBT are treating symptoms, not root causes. I see. So therapists that only adhere to CBT are not addressing root causes. They're just treating symptoms. Yes and no. Are there some that are? Yeah. But CBT can address root causes. It also kind of depends on the therapist, depends on the problem that's coming in. But there are simple, I use the word simple, like a simple presenting problem, like you have a compulsion to smoke or something, or you have simple PTSD as opposed to complex PTSD. It's arguably the case that the primary trauma treatments are under the umbrella of cognitive and behavioral therapies. And so you can address the root of that simple PTSD through CBT and effectively completely cure the person. So it just depends. Now, if the general client that comes into therapy is not suffering from something that could be addressed at its root by CBT, I would completely agree with that. Devi says something that's really long that I'm going to not read because it's super long, Devi. Come on. But you do apologize for it being really long. Maybe I'll read that later. Ash says, being autistic, nerd. Okay, fine, Debbie, I'll read it. Many dating help videos sound to me as if they ignore external problems such as unfavorable environment, job, age, ultimately. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just riff on that. Yeah, the general advice about loneliness or about dating online can be extremely simplistic. And I would guess that 95+% of people who are suffering from chronic loneliness or chronic dating problems, I would guess that 95+% of the advice online is completely useless, or not completely useless, but that, like a lot of dating advice is fine, but it alone will not usually help. And it can make the problem seem like little problems, like someone suffering from chronic loneliness and half of the advice online is telling the person, well, just be yourself or just reach out to other people. And it's like, okay, thank you. But like there's a subreddit that actually, I can't remember what it's called, but it makes fun of stuff like this where someone will post a TikTok video or an Instagram reel or something. And it's just like, hey, those of you that are depressed, you just got to get outside and breathe fresh air and enjoy life. And there's a subreddit dedicated to how stupid these things are. It's just like, okay, thanks. It might even literally be called that, like subreddit, okay, thanks or something. Anyway. So yeah, a lot of dating advice is simplistic and silly. There's just so many different roads, because I've had clients who came to me specifically for loneliness and or for dating problems, and that's the only reason why they came in. And we could spend years looking at various different factors that are contributing, both external, like the societal factors that you were talking about, but also their own traumas and just subtle things. Anyway, and luck of the draw, I think. Anyway, Ash says, being autistic, neurodivergent doesn't preclude you from being an asshole. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. End of hot take. Yeah, I suppose that is a hot take. And yeah, absolutely. I hope no one would disagree with that. Can you be autistic and an asshole? Yes. Can you be neurodivergent and an asshole? Yes, absolutely. And being autistic or neurodivergent does not excuse asshole behavior. Now, are people on the autism spectrum mislabeled as being an asshole when they are suffering from their neurodivergence or something, or they're misinterpreted or something? Yeah, that obviously happens all the time, is probably more of the time. Jess says, not showing up for your friends' special events is not, quote unquote, knowing your limits or, quote unquote, holding your boundaries. You should show up for people you care about, even if you are tired. Well, that makes me sad for you, Jess. So what I'm hearing is that you have friends who don't show up for your special events, and they're telling you, look, I'm not showing up to your birthday party because I know my limits or I'm holding my boundaries. And yeah, that sucks. Personally, I would get better friends. Now, for some people, now if a friend went to Jess and said, I love you as my friend and I'm so sorry, but I can't go to that birthday party because of my limits or my limitations or my personal issue, or I'm stretched too thin or something, and I'm so sorry that I can't make your birthday party. But let me make it up to you by doing this or that, because it's your birthday party. And then if you're Jess and like you invite 10 people and literally no one shows up, because that happened. There's a trend on Reddit where people will post a picture of like, I cooked all this food for a Super Bowl party and no one showed up. And I always feel so bad for these people. And I just wonder like what happened there, because as a party thrower myself, that's happened to me. And I mean, I don't know what it is about me, but I like to throw parties. I like to throw events, and I've been doing it ever since I was a kid. I think I know where it comes from. My mom loves to do this. All of my birthday parties and even things like Easter or Boys' Day, Japanese Boys' Day or Girls' Day, my mom would go all out for it. And so I got it from that. But there are certain principles that you have to follow in order to pull off a good party in which people will attend and enjoy and want to, because typically the people you invite to one party, you want them to come to another party, if you're having even if it's just your birthday party, people you invite one year, you're likely to invite the next year, right? So how things go at that birthday party will determine if someone wants to come to the next one, So it's hard though, and it's not taught in schools, and it requires a lot of, I think, expertise and self-esteem, and you have to build those friendships and those communication lines with people, and they're, and self-disclosure, like, hey, best friend of mine, I really, really want you to be there because of X, Y, and Z. And I understand if you can't, there's things like that. But what I try to do while I'm on this topic is I try to create a kind of a buzz around the event. Like I'm currently planning my Christmas party that I throw every year. Stacy and I throw, but it's mainly me. I mean, Stacy does a lot of things, but I do all the inviting and all the planning and all that kind of stuff. And Stacy does like all the decorations and all the food and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, and so we're both doing our part. But what I do is because I feel like a lot of people, when they throw a party like this, they will send out like an evite, and it'll be like a what do you call it? Like a broadcast email. What do you call it? Like a blind copy email or something, and a group email, and it'll just be like, hey, I'm throwing this party. I want you all to be there. And sometimes that works, but if you really want to make sure that people show up, you have to talk to them on the phone or in person and say, hey, there's this party. Now, you don't want to be a dick and corner people. So you don't want to push people away by cornering them or forcing them or something. But I'll tell you from my experience, when I'm invited to something and I just get one of those blanket, like my cousin had a party for his son who graduated. So it was a high school graduation party. And it happened on a day that was kind of difficult for me to attend. I could have attended at least for a portion of time because it was sort of one of those open house things where you could sort of stop by anytime. And I'm close enough to my cousin and to my cousin's son. I guess it's like first cousin once removed, it would be him. And that I felt like I should and wanted to attend. And all the other people that would be attending, I probably would know, close extended family members, that sort of thing. But because he sent a blanket email just one time, I got the impression that his inner circle were people that he was communicating with, that he really wanted to be there, and that he wanted me there, but he wasn't like really enthused. He didn't need me to be there, you know? And so when I was doing my sort of mental calculation about like, okay, do I really make the effort to make sure that I'm there, even though it's pretty inconvenient, and even though I'm going to see him at this other event, you know, not too long from now or so, I decided not to go. Whereas if he had just emailed me directly, or texted me, or called me, or mentioned it to me, I definitely would have been there. You know what I mean? That's just one example. But why am I on this thing? Oh, well, Jess, I hope that you're okay. The other thing that I'll say about special events is that, even for myself, that let's say that all of my friends, whether they're close or otherwise, just stop coming to my parties or something. Well, it kind of sucks, but really what I'm looking for is friendship and togethership and love and connection. And that's what I want to put effort into. And, you know, having parties can be a part of that, but it's not really the main venue for that. So, but sometimes, you know, you have a birthday party and you want a bunch of people to show up, and you want, especially so here's another thing that I'll talk about while I'm on this topic, that a lot of people are walking around with trauma around birthday parties specifically, but events like this, like their high school graduation, their parents didn't care to show up, or their older sister didn't bother coming, or something like that. Or they, as kids, like they moved from town to town, and they attended, they wanted to be invited to birthday parties, and they were rarely invited because they never really connected with people, or they didn't know people long enough because they kept moving around. They always wanted a birthday party because they would see that in movies and TV shows, you know, it's just, it just looks like the best. And then you grow up and you're like, okay, finally I can throw my own birthday parties. And there's a lot at stake, you know, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of hiccups because of that trauma and stuff. And so I guess, as a party thrower myself, and as someone who really enjoys it, I hope that you can get that. It's not a frivolous thing to want. It's not a frivolous trauma that is affecting you. You know, it's a big deal to me, even though I don't have traumas around that. It's a good experience from my childhood that I try to recreate. You know, like Christmas itself. I have a lot of fond memories growing up with Christmas, and every Christmas time, my wife and I actually, in fact, we love Christmas so much because we had a lot of good Christmases growing up, that we both agreed that we love the Christmas tree and the ornaments and all the stuff and the lights. We love it so much that we're going to put up the Christmas tree after Halloween. Because, you know, a lot of times they're like, you can't put up the Christmas tree, or you can't listen to Christmas music until after Thanksgiving, they'll say, right? And look, I understand if you hate Christmas, or, you know, you're Jewish like Rebecca, you know, Rebecca, ironically Jewish, hates Christmas, doesn't hate Christmas, but, you know, hates being forced to participate or something. But her birthday is also on Christmas. So her whole life has been overshadowed by Christmas and by the dominance of Christianity in the United States. Anyway, and so I get that. But, you know, for us that love Christmas, like, let us love it, as long as we're not imposing it on you. And usually they say you can't do Christmas stuff until after Thanksgiving. And I think even that was like kind of rare, because I feel like when I was growing up, people didn't put up a Christmas tree until like a week maximum before Christmas. Maybe 2 weeks, but I think a lot of times people wouldn't put up a Christmas tree until just a few days before Christmas, which kind of makes sense when you think about the way we used to celebrate holidays in the past. Like Halloween as a kid was a very low budget affair. I don't think I ever had a costume that cost money. I think I always had a costume that I could just sort of cobble together from stuff around the house, you know? And I never thought that you should purchase anything for Halloween. Or my mom would make something and it would just get hand-me-down through the generations. Like my older sister had a cat outfit that I think my mom made, and then I wore that when I was a kid, and I think my younger brother wore that. Anyway, And so why am I rambling about this? But Stacy and I this year were just like, or last year we were like, let's put up the Christmas tree after Halloween or after Halloween. It feels like, because we have a Halloween party. And if we had a Christmas tree up at our Halloween party, our friends would come over and all make fun of us because we probably would want the Christmas. There's a part of me that wants the Christmas tree up the entire year. And I know for a lot of you, you're thinking, that's insanity. What's wrong with you? That's a hot take that I have. I want a Christmas tree up all year. However, now that I'm rambling, maybe this is a result of me being kind of sick, is that my brain isn't working quite right. So I'm like jumping from topic to topic. But while I'm on this topic, when we walk the dogs, they're on a certain route, there's a house in our neighborhood that will have the Christmas tree up visible from the street, like in May. And Stacy always wonders if they're dead. It's a joke that if anyone has any non-seasonal things up, like Halloween decorations up in January, the first thought that Stacy always has, and she's quite convinced that it's a good possibility, that the people in the house have died and no one has discovered the bodies yet. And I'm always like, or they're lazy, or they're depressed. So that's actually the first thing I think is depression. A good percentage of people are depressed, right? And finding the motivation to do anything is hard. And it's kind of a pain in the ass to take down, especially like the major decorations that you have, right? It's a thing. And if you can't get out of bed to even take a shower or to eat, which is what depression is like for people, then, it's going to be hard to take down the things. Also, marital conflict can play a role of two people playing a passive aggressive game of just like, well, I'm not going to take the Christmas tree down because they're not going to take it. Things can get kind of weird in houses, so that's what I go to when I see someone with a Christmas tree up. But I guess if I had a Christmas tree up, then everyone would think that about me. But they can go to hell. Plus, people can't really see the inside of our house from the street, so we wouldn't get that kind of judgment. But the birds would see, and the coyotes and the raccoons, they would see. But I don't really care about their judgment because, they have all sorts of weird opinions about things. Why am I on this topic? Special events. Yeah. Well, let's adjourn there. Take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.